Imagine this: you're undead, you're gorgeous, you're charming enough to make even the most stoic cleric question their vows. There's just one tiny problem. You spent the last 2 centuries being someone else's errand boy, hunting poor souls for your vampire master while you dream of, I don't know, a day off. That's the story of Astarion and Cunin, Baldur's Gate 3's most debonair disaster. On the surface, he's the kind of guy you'd swipe right on in an instant, and I say this as a straight guy, but underneath all that charisma lies a broken man grappling with centuries of servitude, trauma, and the terrifying idea of freedom. So how does a vampire spawn shackled to an egotistical monster become one of the most beloved characters in modern gaming? Is it his sass, his struggle, or maybe that uncanny ability to be deeply flawed and still somehow perfect? Well, let's take a look at the tragic, thrilling, and occasionally hilarious story of Astarion. Before the game, during Baldur's Gate 3, and even the cultural ripples he's left in his wake. This is one tale that will have you questioning whether monsters are made or born. To really understand Astarion, you first have to grasp the life of a vampire spawn in Dungeons & Dragons lore, and it's not exactly glamorous. A vampire spawn isn't some suave, castle-dwelling nightwalker sipping blood from crystal goblets. No, they're more like the underpaid interns of the vampire world. They're enslaved by their creators, stripped of free will, and ordered to do all of the dirty work. Think fetching victims, disposing of bodies, or in Astarion's case, being a glorified hunter. Before his unlife began, Astarion was a high elf magistrate in Baldur's Gate, sophisticated, privileged, and blissfully ignorant of the nightmare ahead. Born in 1229 DR, he lived a respected life in the city, enforcing laws and navigating its political intrigues. That is until the year 1268 DR, when a chance encounter with a group of Gurs changed his fate forever. Left for dead after their attack, Astarion was approached by the vampire lord Cazador Szarr, promising salvation through the gift of immortality. Cazador turned Astarion into a vampire spawn. The reality of this gift became horrifyingly clear when Astarion awoke in a coffin buried beneath several feet of soil. He had to claw his way out of the ground with his bare hands, only to find Cazador waiting for him at the surface. From that moment on, Astarion belonged to his new master. But Cazador wasn't satisfied with mere control. Over the next 2 centuries, Astarion endured unimaginable torment at the Szarr Palace. Cazador carved intricate symbols into his back, marks that he described as poems. Astarion dismissed these as more of his master's sadistic games, but in truth, these inscriptions were part of a much more sinister plan. They were components of an infernal contract with the archdevil Mephistopheles, allowing Cazador to perform the rite of profane ascension. This ritual required the sacrifice of 7,000 souls, including Astarion's and those of his 6 siblings, other vampire spawns enslaved by Cazador. For centuries, Astarion seduced and hunted victims, unknowingly contributing to the body count needed for his master's ascension. If completed, the rite would make Cazador a vampire lord free from all the traditional weaknesses. No sunlight, no running water, no limits to his power. Then, in the year of 3 ships sailing, 1492 DR, after over 200 years in Cazador's service, Astarion's fate took another dramatic turn. While luring a young noble back to the Szarr Palace, Astarion was abducted by a mind flayer and placed aboard a nautiloid. Inside the ship, he was infected with an illithid tadpole, setting the events of Baldur's Gate 3 into motion. When we first meet Astarion in Baldur's Gate 3, he's a charming rogue with a sharp tongue and an ego large enough to eclipse the moon. But beneath that bravado lies a man standing at the edge of an existential crisis, because for the first time in over 2 centuries, he's finally free. The illithid tadpole in his head, while horrifying for most, is nothing short of a miracle for Astarion. It severed Cazador's hold over him, meaning he can finally walk in the sunlight, make his own decisions, and oh yeah, not spend eternity grovelling for someone else's power. But freedom isn't as simple as it sounds, and for Astarion, It's terrifying.
But if I finish the ritual you started, I'll never have to fear anyone. Ever.
Throughout the game, Astarion wrestles with two conflicting desires: the freedom to live life on his own terms and the lingering temptation to become just like his master. You see, as the party explores his backstory, we learn that Cazador wasn't just cruel, he was grooming Astarion to ascend as a vampire lord, a literal monster ruling over others just as he was once ruled. This is where Astarion's morality gets deliciously murky. On one hand, he has every reason to hate Cazador and reject his ways, and on the other, the law of ultimate power and vengeance is almost too great to resist. Would it really be so bad to use that power to ensure no one could ever control him again? Or is that just trading one form of tyranny for another? But Astarion's story isn't just about power, it's about trust. For someone who spent centuries using others to survive, learning to care about his companions is no small feat. Whether he's flirting with Tav or begrudgingly admitting someone's importance to him, there's always a spark of humanity trying to break through the walls he's built around himself. And then there's the big choice, the moment when Astarion can claim the power Cazador promised him by performing the Ritual of Thorns. This involves sacrificing hundreds of vampire spawn to ascend as a vampire lord. It's a decision that forces players to confront what kind of person or monster Astarion is becoming. Will he embrace his freedom and finally break the cycle of cruelty, or will he fall prey to the same darkness that enslaved him for centuries? Of course, this is Baldur's Gate, so the game lets you push Astarion towards redemption or indulge in his most monstrous instincts. And either way, his reaction is a testament to the incredible writing behind his character. Whether he's devastated by the thought of repeating Cazador's sins or drunk on the high of ultimate power, Astarion's story is as much about his humanity or lack thereof as it is about his vampiric nature. In short, Astarion's arc in Baldur's Gate 3 is a masterclass in character development. He's not just a pretty face with a tragic past, he's a man grappling with freedom, morality, and the age-old question, what does it mean to truly be alive? Well, alive-ish. Now let's talk about vampires. They're everywhere in pop culture, whether it's Dracula, Lestat, or that sparkly guy from Twilight. Vampires have always been sexy, dangerous, and shrouded in tragedy. But Astarion, he's something different. What sets Astarion apart is how he embodies the archetype while subverting it at the same time. Yes, he's charming, yes, he's a little bit dangerous, and yes, he's very handsome. But unlike the typical vampire trope of reveling in power, Astarion is haunted by his lack of it. His story isn't about seduction or dominance, it's about breaking free from centuries of oppression and learning what freedom really means. Fans of Dungeons & Dragons lore will also appreciate how Astarion's character leans into the classic rules of vampire spawn, but twists them. Traditionally, vampire spawn are secondary villains, mindless servants to their vampire masters. They're rarely given the spotlight, let alone a personality as rich and layered as Astarion's. His journey from subservience to self-discovery is a rare take on a creature often relegated to the shadows. And it's not just hardcore D&D fans who love him. Astarion's sharp wit, emotional vulnerability, and morally ambiguous choices have made him the breakout star of Baldur's Gate 3. The internet can't get enough of him. Memes, fan art, fan fiction, highly sexualized images, you name it. Astarion has inspired it. In many ways, Astarion represents a shift in how vampires are portrayed in modern media. He's not just a seductive predator or a tragic loner, he's a victim, a survivor, and depending on how you play the game, a potential hero. It's no wonder he's become the fan favourite, not just among gamers, but also among anyone who loves a good story about redemption and power. While he might not have the literary pedigree of Dracula or the mainstream fame of Edward Cullen, Astarion has carved out his own space in vampire lore, and honestly, he might just be one of the most interesting vampires we've seen in a long time. Astarion's story is, at its core, a tale of survival, power, and what it means to really be free. Astarion isn't just a character, he's a mirror for the player. Do we push him towards redemption, or do we indulge in his darkest desires? It's this duality that makes him one of the most memorable companions in modern gaming. He's not perfect, not even close, but that's exactly why we love him. Astarion reminds us that even the most broken souls can fight for something better or give in to their worst instincts. So where do you stand? Is Astarion a tragic anti-hero clawing his way towards freedom, or is he destined to repeat the sins of his master, trading chains for a crown? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this journey into his story, don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel.